Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the UX World, The Rundown. This is where we bring you the latest developments in the voice industry and discuss the practical applications and insights and opportunities for people within the industry. Brands, designers, developers, and anyone else who's got an impact or interested in making an impact in this scene. I would like to welcome you, Dustin Coates, who joins us once again. Hello there, Dustin.
Hey Kane, how's it going?
Very well, thank you. We got some very good feedback from the last rundown, so excited to do this one again.
Yeah, I think so. And there's been a lot of news since we did that, so I think we'll have a lot to cover. We'll go through the highlights for sure, and we may miss some stuff, but we can always tackle it in the rundown number 3.
Yes. It's been a bit of a busy kind of period over the last few weeks, and we've kind of finally got our kind of schedules aligned to do this. So let's jump into it. We've got, as you said, we started out with about 30 stories, and we've managed to whittle it down to a few. So do you want to kick us off with the first thing we're going to discuss?
Yeah, for sure. The first thing that we came across was this story from TechCrunch showing that the Google Home Mini was the top selling smart speaker. And in fact, it accounted for 1 in 5 smart speaker sales in Q2. And this is a trend that we're seeing a lot. Alexa's still the leader for sure, but Google is encroaching. Apple was encroaching a little bit as well, but Google is definitely starting to eat into that pie. Kane, what do you think that this means for brands, developers, voice designers?
Well, I was in the process of drafting a blog post recently, and when I was drafting this, it's changed so quickly that I don't think that it's relevant anymore, but I'd be interested in getting your perception. My thoughts were, initially, this was about 3 weeks ago, that you should probably be focusing on Google Assistant first rather than Alexa. So brands, developers, designers, if you're focusing on Google Assistant, you get 2 main things that you won't get on Alexa. One is the full transcript of your interactions with your users, which means more user insight, which means you get more information to be able to refine and iterate and build out a robust, fully functioning experience. And the other is that the usership in the smart speaker space, the usership on Alexa is more so than Google. Therefore, it's less risky to go Google first. However, I don't know whether the insights on the transcripts is true, but now I'm not 100% sure whether or not the insights on the usership is true, because Google have been promoting not just the home smart speaker, but the whole assistant offering relentlessly over this year so far. So for brands and developers and for designers, I think that the main takeaway from this really is that if you're not or haven't got under the hood on Google Assistant yet, and you haven't really done much in the Google Assistant space, I think it's getting to the point where it's kind of unavoidable, isn't it? Yeah,
I think so. And I think the way I see it is that you really should be developing for both platforms, whether it's through building the app twice or using a tool like Jovo that we've had on a previous podcast. You should really be considering both of these platforms. I think the Google one is, as a developer, I think it's got some ways to go for sure, but I think in a lot of ways it's a joy to use. And something to consider as well is not just these smart speakers. Alexa certainly has the lead in that, but Alexa certainly also doesn't have a billion phones out there in the wild, and Google does. So if you're thinking about this very broadly, and you go out and speak with people who have Android phones, ask them if they're using their assistants. A lot of them actually are, even if they don't have a Google Home or a Mini or a Max at home.
And a lot of people are using it without knowing that they're using Google Assistant in inverted commas. A lot of people are talking to the phone and asking Google stuff without knowing that it's Google Assistant. It's just, I think, the mobile side, the Google Assistant experience on a mobile is actually really, really good. So it's definitely got one over there. And just going back just briefly, you mentioned that, for people considering developing, should certainly be considering development for both Alexa and Google. what would you recommend them to use something? I know we've had Jovo on the podcast, and the guys at Jovo are absolutely fantastic. I love what they're doing with their product. I love their vision for the kind of multimodal future, which we'll probably get into a little bit actually in this episode. Would you kind of recommend for people to use a tool like Jovo, or would you recommend for people to focus specifically in each kind of area?
That's a tricky one, because I think it comes down to what you're trying to do, right? The great thing about a tool like Jovo or Salesforce, actually, we didn't include this in the rundown, but I think this might actually be one of the biggest pieces of news over the past couple of weeks. Salesforce announced a lot of voice-driven stuff over the past, I think it was last week. Einstein voice is one where companies can build things on top of Salesforce and on top of voice. But they're also releasing, if I recall correctly, they're releasing tooling that will allow people to build these experiences across different devices too, which is an interesting move from Salesforce. I'm not sure entirely what to make of it, but if you're looking for something that is going to be 90%, 95% of the capabilities, right? Something that's not cutting edge, sure, go with Jovo, go with one of these other platforms. The downside, of course, is that if Alexa announces something, if Google announces something, if you want to use it and you're using a Jovo, you have to wait for Jovo. Whereas if you're building natively, so to speak, you can go in there and add it as soon as you have access to it. So it really, I think, comes down to your goals and where your comfort level is as well. I don't think there's really a wrong way to do it, especially considering the footprint of a voice application today and the fact that we're really only targeting these two platforms.
Speaking of features and things that kind of these platforms are releasing, the next thing that we can touch on is that this was a few weeks back, but I think that it's definitely worth mentioning because it has such a huge impact, is that Google have announced support for multilingual usership, I suppose. So this is where it doesn't matter what language you speak, providing Google Assistant supports it, you can just speak to Google Assistant in whatever your language is, and it will respond to you in that language. So for example, the example it gives online, which I'll include the link to the video in the show notes, is that there's a family, and I think the husband might be Spanish, the wife might be American, but they kind of both speak both languages, and the wife asks Google something in English, gets an answer in English, the husband then asks something in Spanish and gets the answer in Spanish. So that has the potential to then open up this assistant and provide even more value to even more households, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And the interesting caveat is that I believe it's only limited to 2 languages at the moment at a time. You have to specify ahead of time, but I think that's probably enough. You're most often going to see bilingual households more than trilingual or more households. And I grew up in South Texas, and so a lot of my friends, a lot of the people around me would speak English and Spanish at home. Perhaps they had older members of the household who didn't speak English as well. And so here you're able to also include, if you have a multi-generation household where you have those different languages, you're able to include everyone in the house. It's not just the domain of one group or another.
And visitors as well, guests, friends and stuff like that who might speak other languages or whatever. What's the impact then in terms of, for people and developers who have Google Assistant actions, do they need to go away and translate all of their skills and provide an alternative language?
Yeah, I think you have to. I think if you want everyone in the house to be able to use that and use it in whatever language they want, then certainly. We talked about this before though, right? The issue is that either you have to be fluent in the languages that you want to localize in, or you have to hire someone, which not many people are making money in voice applications right now. Is it really worth hiring someone at the moment? An alternative, I think, is, if you have people who are truly bilingual, I think what you'll probably see is that they are comfortable sort of having in their mind 2 separate compartments. And this is, I use English when I want to interact with this skill or application. I use French when I want to interact with this skill or application. So I don't think it's unnecessary, but if you want to reach the largest audience, you're going to want to do that already anyway.
And we'll link to, we did a podcast on internationalizing your voice experience with Micah Defua, so we'll link to that in the show notes if you're interested in getting into detail and how to go about doing this stuff. Then check that one out. So the next story, the last one on Google, this was in Tech Advisor, and this is around the announcement that Google will be releasing it's called the Google Home Hub, which is essentially, it's like the Echo Show. So it's a device, a Google Home device with a screen. Now, there's other things out there that I think LG might have announced something, and there's other manufacturers who've got smart displays that run Google Assistant on it. But this is the first one from Google themselves. And this was from kind of last week. It's looking like it's going to be coming out on the 9th of October. I'll certainly hear more from Google's annual hardware event. There's no date for it to come out, actually, but the rumour is it's going to cost about £200. But the main kind of takeaway from this, and we can maybe... here we go, 11th of October. There you go, it is coming out, 11th of October. I think the main takeaway from this is the move towards screens in conjunction with voice. That seems to be the broad kind of trend, is that, and we can get into the Amazon Alexa announcements from last week as well, which we'll get into in a moment. But there was more and more devices coming with screens. So what does that mean then for brands and designers, developers who are in this space? Dustin, does that mean we need to start seriously considering more of a multimodal experience?
I'd have to think so. I would have to think so. And this is, I think, where Google has a lead on Amazon. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of Amazon's moves on this one. But you have certainly a lot more flexibility today using the assistants in terms of what you're displaying, because it does have that phone background that it comes from. And I don't know if have you seen any of the screenshots or videos of the LG or JBL?
I've seen screenshots of the LG one, I think. Yeah. It was from earlier on in the year, actually. So I've seen, this
summer, both the LG and JBL announced those and released them. And they look gorgeous. The display looks great. The output looks great. The device itself looks great. So I was a little surprised to hear this news from Google. We'll see how it works, how it looks, but I think this is a positive, because this isn't saying that voice isn't important. It's saying that voice isn't the output or the input mechanism for everything. There are some things where a display is going to work better, and those two work really well together.
Yeah, and we've touched on this on the podcast a few times as well, haven't we, in terms of some things are really challenging to do with purely just voice. If you've got long menu structures, or if you have, tabular information, then not everything works in a pure audio form. So it looks as though these are going to give, it's almost like a fallback, isn't it? If you can't handle it purely within voice, then you need some way of falling back.
That's one way to think about it, I think. Another way to think about it is to take a cue from the web and mobile development side a little bit, with the progressive enhancements, where as new capabilities are added for a user, you provide those new capabilities to the users that have them. And the ones that don't, they still have a workable experience, but they're not getting the full experience perhaps, or they're not getting everything that you might build into there. So that might be something that people really need to start thinking about, is that progressive enhancement of, okay, well, this is a voice-only experience. This is a voice-first experience, meaning it has a display, or this is a voice-added experience where the display is actually taking the lead. And that's something that designers and developers need to really start keeping in mind as they're sketching out. So I think the big takeaway for me as a developer is that ever upward, more capabilities and more complexity, but more benefits to the end user.
Yeah, and more opportunities for those who are building on these platforms. If you've got more kind of more tools in your kind of toolbox, then you can create ever more compelling stuff.
It's true. I think One thing that's always been interesting to me about voice, though, are the constraints. The idea that you have these really well-defined constraints, and I think a lot of creativity comes out when you have those. So I'll take a moment to mourn perhaps the loss of these constraints, but I agree with you. I think this is all in all good news.
Yeah, I think that you're right in terms of, I think most creative endeavors have some kind of constraints, whether it's time scale or costs or whatever it might be, tools that you're using perhaps. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that what I'm hoping, and for everyone listening who is, designers, developers, and brands, what I'm hoping will happen is that these things will be additive, as in they will add something to the experience without taking away the voice. I'd say voice first, because everything should be able to work, just with your voice, because that's where the efficiencies are. That's where the kind of time saving is. That's where the whole kind of opportunities are with this technology. So we've never been able to just speak at something before and have it do what we want it to do. So I think what I would employ everyone to do is, when you've got these multimodal kind of experiences and you've got screens that you can incorporate as well, is try and lead with voice.
Yeah, don't be lazy. Don't say, there shouldn't be skills or actions that say, sorry, this is only for people with displays, unless it's absolutely necessary.
Good point. So the next story then, Dustin, Alexa and Amazon have been hugely busy over the last week.
Yeah. What
Sorry,
is it?
I don't know that.
Oh, sorry, I better put her on mute. You don't know that, you should do. You've been doing nothing but announce stuff over the last week. And
what is it? Eight new devices that we heard?
Something like that. I think it's eight new devices, but then in and amongst that, there's all kinds of new functionality and new kind of all kinds of announcements around Alexa. So we won't maybe get into absolutely everything, but from a kind of flying through it all, there's two new Echo. Well, there's more than two new Echoes, but in terms of the traditional things that we see as Echoes, there's a new Echo Dot and there's a new Echo. What do they call it? Essentially, it's just the standard Echo, isn't it? The kind of slightly bigger one. It's not in this list, but there is one. So there's two new Echoes. I think the two interesting ones for me, there's other things in there. They've got an Echo Sub, which is potentially looking to rival your likes of Sonos. There's a Fire TV Recast, which is seems as though it's like a live TV recording and broadcasting thing, almost like replacing your Sky or Virgin Box or whatever. There's a new Echo Show with a bigger display on there as well, and there's a few other things around a Ring security camera. The most peculiar one, I think, is the microwave. So they've announced that they're going to release a microwave. And the Echo Input, which turns any normal speaker into a smart speaker with a little kind of Echo kind of little device that you plug your speaker into. And the Echo, what's it called? There's no title on here. It's the Echo...
Which
Auto.
one is this?
There we go. It's the Auto. Yeah.
Echo Auto, yeah.
Yes, for the car. There you go. Yeah. So that kind of brings the Alexa service into the vehicle. So obviously Alexa have announced a load of partnerships with BMW and other car kind of manufacturers, but this is a way of getting it into the older models, which might never get that. So a whole bunch to digest there, Dustin. We'll get into what it means for the people behind the scenes, the people within the industry, all of these new device announcements. But what's your kind of impressions initially on this whole fleet of announcements?
Yeah. I think this is what we've been seeing recently, especially with the partners. But Amazon's doing it first party now, which is they want to be everywhere in your home, they want to be everywhere in your car, they want to be everywhere that you are. We know we've seen headphones with Alexa built in. We've seen, like you mentioned, partnerships with car manufacturers. And now what we're seeing here with a microwave, with a clock, are Amazon wants to be not just, hey, what's the weather? But it's really, they want it to be an Amazon household. And I don't think today we're at a point where you're an Amazon household or you're a Google household or you're an Apple household. But that's certainly what these companies want. It's pretty easy to switch between platforms right now if you want to. But if you start adding the Alexa clock, if you start adding the Alexa microwave, then it gets to be that lock-in that these companies want where you are an Alexa household.
It's the same kind of lock-in that Apple have had, isn't it, with the iOS, the iMacs and the kind of MacBooks and phones. And
you see it on mobile, right? It's where I've bought $200, £200, €200 of applications, of apps. So if I switch my Android to iOS, I no longer have that. What do you think this means for brands? Do you think brands need to start thinking more holistically about this as well?
I think so. I think that I don't know whether or not it will end up with Alexa households and Google households and things like that. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But we've already discussed that towards the top of the show about how brands need to be having a presence on whichever assistant, because I don't think it's going to be one assistant rules all. I think we'll end up in a situation where there's plenty of assistants that all operate in for various uses and in various domains. Some of which will be Alexa, some of which will be Google, some of which will be things that we haven't heard of yet because they don't exist. But I think some of these announcements are interesting. I don't know whether everything will be a success or not, but I think what I find interesting about this is from a creative standpoint, one of the difficulties is trying to establish a use case quite often, isn't it? So, as a brand, how can we kind of do something that adds value to a user, that adds value to our business, and that kind of is a perfect marriage of something of those two things. And finding a use case is something that people have trouble with. One of the things I think around finding a use case is trying to understand context. So, is somebody on the move with the headphones in, or is somebody in the kitchen with plenty of time on their hands, or is someone just got out of bed and, it's 6:30 in the morning and they're using like an Echo Spot or whatever. It's trying to find the contexts that people are operating in. And I think what some of these announcements do is they provide further context and further kind of defined I suppose, scope for an interaction. So the Echo Auto, it's only going to exist in a car, really. That's what it's positioned as. It's very unlikely that it's going to, you're going to put one of those in your kitchen. So what that then does is, you were talking earlier on about constraints and how kind of creativity kind of flourishes when you've got constraints. So that puts constraints on what you're going to be able to do. So somebody has one of these Echo Autos in a car, in a vehicle, that then gives you some context to design for. It gives you a scope and a space to start exploring ideas within. I think the same's true even of the microwave, funnily enough. If you're warming up your Uncle Ben's rice, then you've got potentially a little bubble of time, a little kind of slot of constraints, as you mentioned, that you can start exploring use cases in. So I don't know whether or not they'll sell hugely, but I do think that it will provide certainly a great deal of opportunity for brands. If you think about it as a way of understanding the context that somebody's in, and trying to design use cases for that. And I think the other thing is, on the Echo Show, another device, another screen, bigger screen this time, and I read one thing that was saying that the Echo Show is looking to try and take over TVs in the kitchen. So now you're in the realms of content, so I definitely think that the whole thing is it's exciting, and it is laden, I think, with opportunities for everybody in the scene. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned context, because that also means that if you are a brand building voice applications, you need to start thinking about the different contexts that people are in and whether your voice applications serve those. So if you are an Uncle Ben's and you can tell or assume that someone's in the kitchen, then maybe they want step-by-step of a certain recipe. Whereas if they're in their car, then maybe they want a shopping list and to be reminded on their way home to pick up those. So brands need to, perhaps, and developers and designers, so far we've only thought of, the Echo is when people are on the couch. But the Echo Show, the Echo Auto, all of these things are going to be in many different places, and the voice applications probably need to mirror where people are at a given time. at least if they want people to use it throughout the day.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it'll be interesting. Certainly will get more interesting if there ever became a time when we were talking beforehand, Dustin, and you were mentioning in terms of what the analytics are that you can get back, and you were saying you can't actually see what device people are using. But I think if that ever became something, then that would give us, some real insight in which to iterate on, wouldn't it? If you could see whether it's an Echo Auto or it's an Echo Dot that's being used.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that would be, it would provide for richer index experiences for customers. So I think developers are going to be pushing Amazon for that, whether it's in the online forums or in the upcoming event in Las Vegas. You can be sure that people are certainly going to be asking for that. One thing you mentioned was the new Echo Show, which is, of course, a device with a screen. And that ties in well, I think, with another piece of news that Amazon announced. These flew a little bit under the radar in the news because they are much more developer-oriented. But this is the announcement of the Alexa presentation language. It's in preview right now, but they said that it's going to be rolling out pretty broadly in the next coming weeks. And what this does is this allows developers to go beyond the templates that are available right now. I believe there's 7 templates right now that are available, 6 or 7, and actually allow skilled developers to build much richer displays. These could have slideshows. These could be 3-column, 4-column, whatever you want. And I think this ties in really well with the new Echo Show, but also with the Fire TV, with the DVR that they announced as well. Amazon wants Alexa everywhere, and that includes on our TVs and other devices. How do you feel as a designer? Do you think this is going to be something that's valuable, or do you think it's too much fluff?
I think I'm looking at this in the context of the wider play. So I think that the new Echo Show and the Google Home Hub announcement, and Facebook have been rumored for a long time to be announcing a screen-based assistant kind of device thing. So I think that in the broader scope of things, I do think that we're going to have a lot more screens around. Not just on mobile. I think that it's a good experience to just have something you can look at, something you can watch, something you can consume without needing to go away and touch it or go over there and touch it. So I can totally see that these devices over time will become just as common as the radio that you used to have in the kitchen, or even maybe the smartphone in your pocket. So immediately, I think that the usage of these devices is kind of not huge, but I think that from a design perspective, looking at the bigger picture and thinking about the future, I think that these kind of enhancements it's essentially kind of giving you a lot more flexibility over what you can do, which is always a good thing. Because I think that certainly the use case I keep coming back to is the kind of kitchen. That's the most common place for a smart speaker to be, and that's probably where some of these things will end up. In a kitchen where you're doing other stuff, you might be washing up, you might be cooking, you might be doing whatever. Being able to consume content and access content within that environment via your voice, I think it will be something that ends up growing. That's a use case where I think we'll see huge expansion, is that content consumption while you're doing other stuff in the kitchen. So rather than just having the radio on, you might be able to watch YouTube, you might be able to catch up on whatever it is, all without needing to touch anything. So when I look at what you can do, I mean, the graphics and slideshows and text, that's very kind of primitive, rudimentary kind of early stage stuff, I would say. But then it says soon video content and synchronizing on-screen text and images with the voice and stuff. So that leads me to believe that as the voice is saying something, the images and screen might change, and all of this just provides you, as we said, with far more tools and far more scope for creativity. So I'm thinking from a content perspective, I think it gives you far more opportunity. So it's not just solely voice; it's hands-free completely, but you've got far more scope for content. But then on the kind of like productivity side, it's more like the bells and whistles from the productivity side, showing that your order's being placed, or giving some visual cues that things are happening. So I can see it being helpful there, but I certainly think that the bigger picture over time, as these devices get more and more prevalent, is that you're going to be able to create more dynamic and more original content.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. And that ties in well with another piece of news that also got announced, which was that there are new tools for device makers to add screens as well. So there's been the Alexa voice service for a long time now, but now Amazon is providing tools to add displays also. And it's interesting that you mentioned the home, but I think there's a lot of opportunity as well for commerce and business. You could easily imagine that elevator manufacturers decide to start adding displays. You already have displays in some high rises that show the weather or whatever, but if you can tie that into Alexa, I want to go to the 5th floor. Okay, like here's the people, here's where you're going to turn, here's the restrooms, like all that's going to be on a display. Or you plop this down in a conference room. Alexa, give me the sales numbers for last quarter. And that's going to be able to be read out on the display as well. So I think this is really exciting news, because it does really open up a lot more use cases. If it's really just the Alexa voice service and people can build their own branded speakers, that's interesting, but it's a very small niche. But this allows in the business, this allows maybe you have a waterproof device by the pool, like maybe you have all these different outcomes, and Alexa is going to be on all of those, at least Amazon hopes.
Yeah. I think as soon as you start getting into the enterprise side, the use cases come thick and fast, don't they? You've got meeting rooms, receptionist kind of situations. There's all kinds of areas where this can be applicable. So I think that it's interesting that, because the very two things that are very closely kind of linked, and they both are pushing further capability than purely voice, aren't they? So I think that's kind of the takeaway. I think that the kind of theme, I suppose, of this whole episode really is that voice first obviously is where that's what's going to give rise to the opportunities, but there is a huge kind of introduction really from both of the main platforms into providing visual support as well.
Yeah, and the screen is certainly one mode, and it's certainly an exciting mode, but the last piece of news from last week, well, not the last piece of news, but the last that we're going to discuss from the Amazon side, is the announcement of the Alexa Connect Kit app, which allows companies to integrate this through a microcontroller unit, so a very small piece of the device. And Amazon will handle all the cloud communication with Alexa. And this allows interesting things like, I believe the microwave was created with ACK. I would imagine that the smart plug that they announced would be perhaps powered by ACK as well. And so this allows further encroachment or further addition of Alexa into all of these different devices. Can you see this being a popular thing for homes and users moving forward?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, as you say, it seems as though it's more of almost like a play to hardware manufacturers potentially, but maybe it's not even established hardware manufacturers. I mean, you could always there's opportunities to kind of, I suppose, for the entrepreneurial people among the listeners and among the world, that there's potential to create brand new categories, but not necessarily categories, but brand new kind of products based on this kind of offering, I think. So I think it's definitely part of Alexa's kind of angle to try and put this thing absolutely everywhere. And I think for your likes of, you can see the microwave, you can see the smart plugs, but then you've got coffee machines, you've got washing machines, you've got cars, you've got all of these different areas where kind of hardware sort of still is the primary thing that you'll interact with. So I can certainly see, and when you've got companies like, we spoke to Jan Lachelle from Snips at the start of this week, and some of the use cases that he was discussing, and some of the kind of like the privacy and security benefits that you might get from some of the smaller players. It's not a marketplace that is without competition. So I think that it makes sense for Amazon to try and get this everywhere. But then on the kind of brand industry side, you now have the potential to go and create. If you already manufacture hardware, you've already got now the potential to integrate one of the world's most popular voice assistants with it.
Yeah, for sure. Kane, are you going to be buying any of the new devices or things that Amazon announced last week?
I do like the look of the Echo Show. I can see that being in a prime spot in the kitchen. So maybe that might come our way soon. I'd be tempted to try the Echo Auto as well, to be honest. I would just be interested in just seeing what it's like and what the capabilities are. So I might go down the auto route. I probably won't have any use for the input because every room's got some kind of, it's a Google Home or Echo thing somewhere. You can't move without triggering one of them somewhere. So yeah, and one of the peculiar ones I think was the clock. I mean, it looks like a pretty smart clock, but one of the most common use cases is to ask Alexa the time. So you kind of be defeating the object a little bit with that one. So I might bypass the clock, but I don't. And again, the microwave. I don't know about the microwave yet, but I think over time, I'll probably the two main ones I'm interested in is the show and the input. But over time, maybe the others will grow on me. What about you?
I think if they come to Europe, I'll definitely be picking up a few Echo Smart plugs because I'm still having to get up and turn on or off my fan like a 20th century peasant. So if I can control that with my voice, then that's all I need.
Yeah, I got a smart plug because for the baby's milk making machine thing, the idea was that I'd get a smart plug, I'd set everything up, and then all I would need to do is get out of bed and say, Alexa, make some milk, and it would just trigger the plug, the machine would start, and by the time I get there, there'd be a bottle of milk sitting there. Turns out that if you do that, you still need to actually press the button on the machine to make it actually work. So I've got this smart plug sitting in the kitchen, and I'm just wondering what I can do with it, so maybe I might hook it up to a lamp or something like that.
Yeah, it's now you need I think I saw someone online. I'll try and see if I can find the video and maybe we can include that in the show notes. Someone I think created a hand replica that will push a button on the Alexa command.
That's good. Just hanging above a light switch.
Right, exactly.
Classic. Well, I think that just about wraps it up. I think there's three really quick things that we cover briefly before we wrap up. One is that amongst all of these kind of announcements, Alexa, I know we've had a bit of an Alexa heavy episode this week, but there's two things. One is the whisper feature on Alexa, which means that you can start to whisper at Alexa and it'll whisper back at you. But I don't know whether or not that means that you will need to do something in your skill to mark it up for whisper mode, or whether it will whisper itself. I don't know, Dustin, whether you've come across this yet.
I haven't come across it. I would guess that you probably don't need to, but you can also control the volume, so I don't know how those two are going to tie into each other.
And then the other thing is Alexa hunches. So this is all around Alexa becoming a little bit more proactive and preempting some of the stuff that you might want to do with it. I know Brian Romilly, if you've ever heard him speak on the topic, he's very much an advocate of voice assistants, doing our work for us, so to speak. So, being more proactive, understanding the person, understanding what they're likely to want to do next. So this already happens on, for example, Dustin, you use Android phones. I'm assuming if you have got it set up, then you can get things like, whenever it gets to the time when you typically leave work, you'll get a little notification saying, it'll take you so long to get home or whatever.
Or you should have left for the airport 45 minutes ago. What are you doing? Get out the house.
Yeah. So this is taking that kind of functionality onto the Alexa platform. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops, because I think that could provide some real value. And then the last thing, very, very final thing, there was a Samsung Bixby webinar this week, which I'm going to try and get the link to, if we can, and put it in the show notes, because apparently there's been some announcements on the Bixby front, and apparently it's in beta now. We spoke about it kind of on the podcast and touched on it before, and we've both tried to get access to the beta program and not had any joy with it, but apparently in November Bixby is opening for developers. What do you make of that, Dustin?
I think the thing I make of it is Samsung, you need to hit us up. I've got an S9 Plus sitting right next to me. So if if I can build for it, let me know. Let me and Kane know how we can do it.
Wicked. And it'd be interesting to see where it goes. It might be a dark horse. It might be, who knows what it'll be, really. But it'd be interesting to have a look at it and see what it's capable of.
I mean, Samsung has had some success going off on their own, right? The Gear watches that they have seem to be pretty successful, but then they also have some things that they roll out and just haven't really had much success. And, Samsung's a very popular phone provider, but if you build for Bixby, you're building exclusively for the Galaxies and the Samsung devices.
Big manufacturer of hardware, though, so maybe if it's something that they want to try and implement into the whole hardware ecosystem that they have, then you might not be developing just for Samsung phones. You might be developing for almost a Samsung connected home or whatever.
Right. But the washing machines, the refrigerators, etc.
Yeah. So your washing machine will be telling your fridge that you need milk. So yeah, that kind of just about wraps it up, I think, for this week's rundown. Thank you, Dustin, for joining us again. I think that's been an interesting one.
Yeah, thanks, Kane.
And hopefully, as I say, the response from the first one was pretty good. Hopefully, I think we've discussed a few interesting things this week. So, let's bring it to the people again shortly. So we'll see you on the next episode.